2 days ago, millions of people gathered together to observe an astronomical wonder, which was the first total solar eclipse that the continental United States had seen in 38 years. It seemed like a good time to talk about the relationship between science and faith. So let's do that tonight. Ask you to please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Just want to mention that today is also the feast of Saint Rose of Lima, Peru. She was a third order member of the Dominican order. And she was born in 1586. Lima was a fairly good-sized city, colonized by the Spanish. And she didn't live very long. She remained alive till 1617. In order to avoid some of the worldly and focus on pleasure, I mean, one of the reasons that so many people had gone to Peru was to conquer and take stuff and bring back gold to Spain and to have a good life as a result of it. And she tried to stay apart from that world. And she had her father, who was wealthy enough, to build a small hermitage in their hacienda. It's a sort of a U-shaped complex, and in the center was her little place to stay and focus on prayer and doing penance for the sins being committed around her. It's something that we don't think of a lot anymore, but it's not a bad idea to learn from someone like her and do little penances for the sinners we know in our families. People have gone away from the faith, gone away from morals, and do so in order to bring them back to Christ. Well, of course, we have a guest for us tonight. He is the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at the Catholic University of America. He himself is trained as a research physicist. He's dedicated to combining Catholic faith with the pursuit of knowledge, truth in education, and good science. So please welcome Dr. Aaron Dominguez.
Thank you, Father.
Dr. Aaron, welcome. Good to have you here. Welcome.
It's a real honor. Thank you.
Now, are you from Washington, D.C. originally?
No, sir. Our family moved there about 1 year ago. So I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and North Texas. My wife's from Seattle, Washington area. So this is a new experience for us being in the nation's capital.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoy it there. And do you live near campus?
Not too far in Maryland.
Yeah. Okay. Because it's a very pretty campus at Catholic University with the center on the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. It seems to be the focus of the campus. It's hard to miss.
Yeah.
And the university, well, you're now the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And one of the really cool things, we've had some other professors here from the university, and you can see that Catholic University is making a turnaround to make its Catholic identity more explicit. Mm-hmm. Why was there a need to do that? Why did you have to make it more explicit? It's called Catholic University. Why? What's the problem with the identity?
Right. Well, I had been spending my entire career in secular universities, public and private, as a professor, as a scientist, as a researcher in laboratories. doing great work, and that kind of work can be done at many universities, including Catholic University. But I reached a point where I just got kind of tired of checking my faith at the door when I would walk into the lab or into the classroom.
What do you mean checking your faith at the door?
Well, you can be a faithful Catholic and a faithful man, and also be a scientist at a secular university, but there's no space to discuss, God and to connect creation and our physics that we're studying, to ask these questions. And at the Catholic University of America, I found that they were doing this.
Yeah.
And so I think that connection, which is not a new one, but had been severed sometime in the 1960s in the United States, the leaders of the university realized we should make that connection, we should put that connection back together, because it actually makes us more free as researchers.
And by, say, in the 60s, the connection between integrating faith, Catholic faith, and the sciences and the arts,
right,
that was severed?
I think that there was this something of a divorce between the church, the magisterium, the hierarchy, and American university education. It didn't just happen at our university. I think this was a phenomenon across the United States, which then also we sort of see happening in the rest of the world, the Western world too. And so we did suffer from that as well.
When we think that the concept of a university is itself a Catholic concept, that the university was a place for studying all forms of knowledge, and that the church invented it in the 12th and 13th centuries. And to see that divorce, because Europe also experienced a great divorce. They secularized their universities a couple hundred years ago.
It is strange. I think in the U.S. it happened as a way to receive public approbation, approval from the public, from the government, to try to get more money flowing into the universities, and probably was...
Especially for the GI Bill.
Right.
Because Catholic schools were not as big on the research grants, but we needed the GI Bill for our students.
Yeah. And so there was this great rejection of all authority, even the authority of God and the church. And in the end, it turned out to be a tremendous mistake. But we've corrected it, and we're now, we're definitely on the right road. And it's an exciting time to be at Catholic University right now, while we freely put Christ in the center of what we do in everything, in all of our disciplines, not just theology and philosophy, but in science, in history, in English, in the arts, in literature. So it's fun. It's fun to be an academic. It's fun to be the dean of a School of Arts and Sciences now at Catholic University at this time. So
this is something that it strikes me, though. And you're a physicist. And
most people do find that strange. Yes.
And here you're supposed to be pure science. I mean, physics is about mathematical formulae, research, and understanding from the tiniest subatomic to the greatest galaxies. And y'all are all over the place, right?
Right.
Now, how can you have your faith go along with that?
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about being a Catholic Christian, is that, and it's the reason why the Church created the universities from the beginning, is by understanding God's creation, we uncover truths. And these truths ultimately lead back to the ultimate truth, which is God. And so by studying the natural world, by understanding how things work, how they're put together, we truly see beauty. And so there's absolutely zero conflict between the truth of God as the creator and the truth that we uncover in creation through science. And those two things are like two halves of a whole of what it means to be a human for me as a scientist. It's like having two eyes to see the world. And so there's no struggle internally between faith and reason for me. And there are many like me out there, but I think in the world today, we have to be careful. We're treading a fine line in public, in secular universities. If you say the wrong thing, then perhaps you get yourself into trouble.
I was going to say, is this some political correct stuff that you have to watch for?
Yeah, I mean I think it's along those lines of you must think this way, and if you don't, then you have to keep your mouth shut, or so it's a limitation, in fact, on freedom, when in fact these people are professing freedom of speech as kind of the foundation for academic freedom. And what I've found at Catholic University is that by reconnecting faith and reason, we've become more free. We actually can have discussions that you just can't have at some universities, and these are the kind of things that people should be talking about.
I've come across in various parts of the country medical doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists who have told me that if they were to speak about the problems inherent in, say that one of the areas was the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, if they mention that certain groups, like the elderly, have increased that, they told me they could lose their licensing, even though they know it's true. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that the political correct agenda makes the relationship between Galileo and Pope Urban VIII start to look good. I mean and it's a nasty thing that you can't have as much freedom of speech about the link of faith and science anywhere you want.
Right. So that's what we're doing at Catholic University, and it comes from this revealed knowledge that truth cannot negate truth. If two things are true, they're still both true.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And that forms the logical foundation of our university, of what a good university should be, of what a good Catholic university should be. And so I think we're sort of recapturing and holding on to now what it really means to be a truly good and free research university.
Someone like St. Albert the Great, the patron of scientists and a doctor of the church, was able to teach as many sciences as he could possibly get hold. He was teaching botany, physics, and all sorts of other sciences at the University of Paris and at the University of Cologne, as well as philosophy. He wanted to know everything, and pursue it. That, to me, seems the goal of a Catholic university.
Yeah, so in my own area of research in particle physics, we use the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, to collide protons to basically study what are the fundamental building blocks of matter and what are the rules for putting them together. We study what the universe was like a trillionth of a second after creation, a trillionth of a second after God made the entire universe, if you can believe that.
I mean, that's even faster than a New York cabbie honks his horn when the light turns green. And that's fast.
It is faster than that. What we're studying is asking these basic scientific questions, but it poses these metaphysical questions like, well, why is it this way? How did the universe get created? What created it? Why do these constants these fundamental constants, these constants of nature, why are they such that they are? And if they were a little different, then nothing would work. And it leads us to God. In fact, science is pointing us back towards God as the creator, and the people who have science in their hands now, and the loudest voices are very evangelical atheists who are using science to beat people on the head, to say, get away from God, when in fact it actually naturally leads us towards Him.
Yeah, there's a group of atheists, the professionals, who use science to try and attack the faith. But I think of someone like the grossest example, God rest his soul, but was Christopher Hitchens. He's passed away now, but I hope that the science they present is not as bad as the history they present. He was somebody who had claimed that Mother Teresa of Calcutta was the most wicked person of the 20th century. I was amazed. I think she beat out Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, and she won the prize.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
And so, when you look at the history, the science they present, I look at the history, I said, that's just flat out goofy.
Yeah.
But when you look at the science they present, how does it stack up with integrating your faith?
Well, the science, I mean, look, science is a beautiful thing in that you really can prove that something is true or not, and independent of you as an individual. And what that means is others can check such a thing and either say you were right or you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's if you're a bad scientist, everybody knows it. You can't really cheat your way out of it. It's you can try for a little while, but you get caught. That's just the way it works. Now,
even if you make an honest mistake.
And if you make an honest mistake, you own up to it, and then you build from that and say, okay, that was a mistake. And but these good scientists that you're talking about, they're suffering from this crisis of conscience that they have to work harder than a believer to deny the existence of God. They're really trying to find every possible way around just this sort of natural fact that's been discovered over and over by people throughout the ages that at least God exists. And so for them, I think they really are having a hard time with science as what it's revealing to them about the nature of the world.
One of the things that I'm not very good at science at all. I'm really very poor at it. I read as many popularizations of science and as good of them as I can read. And what I am filled with when I read the science I can understand is a sense of wonder. This is truly amazing. I don't say, it's just this, it's just that, it's just this chemical, just that process. To me, I'm filled with amazement that opens me up more to what God has done.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way, and the older I get, and the more I've learned, and the more I realize I don't know, I feel more and more that way.
Yeah.
And there are countless examples. If the force of gravity were just a little bit different in one way or the other, then stars wouldn't work properly for us to exist. If the nuclear force holding nuclei together were just a little bit different, then carbon wouldn't work right, and there'd be no carbon for life.
And how little are you talking about?
I'm talking about 1 part in 10 to the 50. So put a
50 zeros.
Yeah, put a 1 over a 1 followed by 50 zeros, and that's like how finely tuned it has to be, just for the strong force to be different or something like that.
That'd be like the 50 trillionth or something.
Yeah, I don't even know what you call 10 to the 50.
Quinquecentillionth.
Right. But it goes on and on. I mean, there's the probability of the universe being in the state that it was when it was created is an even more infinitesimal number, 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123. It's just like essentially it's like impossible, right?
And when you think of one of your fellow physicists who came up basically with what we call popularly the Big Bang Theory, discovering the Big Bang Theory did not make him lose his Catholic faith, did it?
He's talking about Father Lemaitre,
Oh,
George Lemaitre.
The priest, yes.
Yeah. He, he was one of the original, proponents and discoverers of the Big Bang Theory. Yeah.
And did it make him leave the priesthood in the church?
No,
Not
Father.
at all?
No.
That the Big Bang Theory was something that enhanced his faith.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a famous physicist, very famous physicist named Hoyle, who was an avowed atheist. And when he kind of came to realize that, the constants of nature and the way that the universe has been put together that we've learned, it's practically impossible for it to just have been random chance.
Yeah.
And he converted and became a believer.
Yes. Yes.
So it can be science can actually be a tool of evangelization, I think.
Again, with having us, keep faith as part of the discussion, as well as opening ourselves to the wondrous nature of studying physics and the other sciences. It's true, one of my former students was an atheist, and she later on studied medicine, and she became a Catholic before that, but especially as a Catholic, as she studied medicine, she was filled with ever more wonder and amazement at, wow, how do these babies come here? She's a neonatologist. So this is something that's quite amazing.
Yeah, so that's where the kind of place that we have at Catholic University, where we can have these kinds of discussions and then take the next step, which is how do we use this science for good instead of bad? How do we do science the right way instead of the wrong way? What are the boundaries that we should put in place in terms of our scientific pursuits? What are the lines we shouldn't cross? Asking these ethical and moral questions that people are not really asking enough of in today's age, when technology and science are changing more rapidly than our culture can keep up with. And so we want to have a space where people can freely discuss these questions. Scientists, philosophers, theologians, historians, and understand what we should be doing as a people.
Another element of the modern world, which is heavily formed by science, that made technology so possible and wondrous things. I remember when I was a young boy, there was widespread famine in the world.
Yeah.
Millions were suffering of famine, and it's not there today.
Yeah.
And scientific changes helped a lot. But at the same time, I'm also aware that scientists came up with the gases used at the concentration camps.
Yes.
And scientists experimented on human beings at the same concentration camps.
Yes.
And they considered scientific theory as the basis for their racism. They were following Darwin's second book, The Descent of Man. And that was science. Science needs that discussion with faith and morality to look at more sides than what they think they've gotten so far.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And terrible things like that happened here in the United States too. It wasn't just in Nazi Germany. And
that's right.
And if you look at it, it's really the logical consequence of the progression of science if you don't have a correct understanding of what it means to be a human being and the value that a human being has. And that comes from our faith and revealed truth. So once you have that, that prevents you from doing these bad things, or at least when you do them, you know they're bad.
Yeah, I don't think we Americans should ever forget that horrendous experiments were done on African Americans.
Yes.
And these things were terrible. They were nothing but evil. Most Americans didn't know about them until later on, but there was already a racist background and mood that allowed people to look down on African Americans and say, well, we can experiment with them.
Right.
And these were absolute evils in the name of science.
Right.
That should never be allowed to dehumanize those people who suffered that here in Russia, Germany, wherever, and that we need that ethical balance. And I think that the sense of faith, that's the basis for recognizing the inherent dignity of human beings as given by God. That's also an important element.
Yeah, that I think forms the foundation for the correct pursuit of science.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things about by the way, at Catholic University, do you have a safety zone for the scientists so that they can say what they want in the little circle?
I think it's called the whole university.
Good. So it's other goofy stuff. You know, one of the things that it's good for people to understand is that the Catholic University of America is a place where this can go on.
Yeah.
We have a little clip that we want to show that's about the Catholic University. So let's take a look at that now.
Okay.
We say that at the Catholic University of America we cultivate Catholic minds. This isn't a matter of memorizing a catechism, it's a university that we're talking about. So the sort of intellectual formation that we're talking about is appropriate to a university. Let me give you some examples. In our study of physics, we have a program at the NASA Goddard Space Center here. Often we'll hear students say that their study of the heavens reminds them of Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. So it may be that our studies themselves lead us closer to God. Or it may work the other way around. It may be that our belief in God informs the way we do music and art, architecture and poetry. Or it may be that our belief that we're all children of God affects the way we think about social work, or the way we teach law, or the way we do business at the university. Our faith and our intellectual life are integrated in this way, and that's part of what we mean by cultivating Catholic minds. Another thing we mean by the idea is that we think that the way we act and the way we think are connected to one another, that living lives of virtue affects the way we think about good and evil, right and wrong. And so we put a lot of emphasis on getting our students to live good lives as well as to study hard in their courses, and these are connected to one another on the intellectual level.
For more information, visit collection.cua.edu.
Catholic University is going to be having a collection. It's the university that belongs not to any one order, but to the bishops of the whole United States. They're on the board of trustees, and basically the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops owns it.
Right.
When is this collection going to take place?
Well, it happens at different times in different parishes across the country, so it's kind of a rolling campaign over the year. And it's part of one of the original ways of supporting the university since its inception. As you say, it is the bishops, the Catholic American Bishops Research University in the United States, so we're unique in that respect. And so by giving a charitable donation to the university, you know, you're not just making a donation, you're actually making an investment in the church. Yeah. You're making an investment in our country. The students that come out of our university become leaders in the church, leaders in the world. We produce, I think we've had 14,000 priests come through. We've had
14,000 priests
five out of the 6 American cardinals currently are alumni of the university, as well as governors and mayors and political leaders and scientists and artists. So you're actually directly supporting the teaching office of the church.
Yeah, it's an important thing, and I think, you know, I recall the days when there was real efforts to take control of the university away from the bishops back in the 60s, and a lot of rebellion going on by some of the theologians and faculty and stuff, and they have turned that around. That's one of the things I like about the university. It's one of the major, I think it's the largest Catholic university to have made that turnaround from some of those struggles of the 60s and early 70s back towards a more firmly Catholic identity without giving up the academic quality.
Yeah, I mean, just like faith and reason aren't incompatible, neither is fidelity to the church and being a university. You can have academic freedom like you have at American universities, and in fact you have more academic freedom, I would argue. And you can still be in accord with the magisterium of the church and its authority. And by making that submission, you know, you actually are more free. And people who are worried that if the church were still in charge of the university, that would be this this mediocre thing, or that it would lead to the destruction of American Catholic institutions. It's turned out to be completely false.
It's the opposite. Now, I've said many times after I've heard stories about the dictatorial relativism of especially coming from the left wing of our culture at universities, that don't allow you to say more and more words, don't allow you to read a lot of books, and you can't do. I mean, I'm appalled at that kind of use of political correctness to filter out, and then you have to have safety zones that are fairly circumscribed. There was more freedom of speech at a medieval university than there is at a modern left-leaning university. And I think not only your support, but I think encouraging your children and grandchildren to go there too. We have to take a break. We're going to come back in a couple of minutes. We want to get some of your questions and comments, so please stay with us. Thank you very much. First of all, if you want to get more information about Catholic University of America and the National Collection and such, you can make an online contribution by just going to collection.cua.edu. So collection.cua for Catholic University of America .edu. So, and they can find out more. Also, if they just go to cua.edu, they can find out more about the university, right?
Thank you, Father. Yes, that's
absolutely. Right. Again, a lot of students are starting their senior year of high school. A lot of them have not yet decided on their college. This is a time to start thinking about those things and see if there's a program that would fit your student. A lot of times people ask me, well, what do you think, what college should I send my kid to? And first question I have is, what does he want to study? What does she want to study? Find out they have that there before you start talking about it. Let's start off with a question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
Poland, Ohio.
Poland, Ohio. And your question?
It's about global warming. I know Pope Francis has come out and said he believes in global warming and the effects it has on the earth. I was wondering if the Catholic Church has a teaching on this, or what do they teach at Catholic universities?
All right. You're a scientist.
I'll take a stab at that first. Pope Francis was not speaking ex cathedra. He was not making an official pronouncement that that all Catholics must adhere to. These things are open for discussion.
Yeah.
And as a scientist, there's evidence that the Earth's climate is warming. There's some evidence that there's some anthropomorphic contribution to that. Now we don't
By
have
anthropomorphic contribution.
We have
human beings
some human
warmer.
contribution, but we certainly don't understand everything yet. It's many scientific questions open, and as far as I know, there's no official church teaching on this other than to just try to pursue the truth.
Yeah, the encyclical Laudato Si mentions that issue, but it also says about 150 times throughout the encyclical, these issues of science and sociology are open for discussion.
Right.
So it's dumb to make it political as to whether there is global warming or not.
Right.
It's necessary to get the science more clear, and then to know from science what is the best way to handle it, what was the best response to the situation, so that we act sensibly. That's what you scientists are supposed to teach us.
Yeah, and that Laudato Si encyclical, I think the beautiful point is that with this understanding of the human person, its dignity, and our place in creation and responsibility for it, it outlines a very beautiful path, I think, that we should take in terms of understanding the human ecology, not just the physical environment, but how our place as people in creation. So.
He makes it very, very clear that the solution to population issues and such will never be abortion.
No.
He never is in favor of making people sexually neutered by having transsexual operations. He rejects that very clearly. Lots of other things that are clear moral teaching, but some things are science. Therefore, you have to study them.
Right.
And get the data. We have Susan on the phone. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Father.
Hi, where are you calling from?
Lafayette, Louisiana.
Aren't you something? Have you been down there?
I have not.
Oh, you got to go down there. They know how to cook over there, I'm telling you. So,
true.
Susan, what is your question?
Father, obviously the Nazi human medical experiments was evil.
Yes.
You mentioned a little while ago that science can produce very good things, such as food in time of a famine, better agricultural methods of farming. Does anyone know if any good came from these Nazi experiments?
Good, very important question. Have you heard anything?
Scientific knowledge has certainly come from this, but you can't produce something good out of something that's inherently evil.
Right.
I think that's the point here. The ends does not justify the means, and to treat a human being as an object is always wrong. And even if what you're trying to do is cure disease, even if what you're trying to do is to help other people, if you treat a human being as an object that can be discarded as a means to the scientific ends, it's always wrong. You can never do something good from that.
And on another side too, Susan, people have looked at their papers and such, and there was nothing usable, because not only were the experiments done in evil ways, they were stupid questions to begin with. Most questions are important, but these were absurdly stupid questions, and evilly stupid questions about experimenting on twins to see which one would suffer more, how long it took to die from certain diseases, and they didn't have proper controls, etc. So they were absolutely evil and also truly poor quality scientists. And I think there was more controls. It was in Tuskegee that they experimented on African Americans
against their knowledge. That's
right.
They
didn't know that they were being experimented on. Was it with?
It was the study of syphilis. And they would withhold treatment without people's knowledge.
Right. So they would give syphilis to individuals and not treat them to see how it developed, and as a control group. That's evil.
Yeah.
They were considered, they were inmates in prison, I think.
Yeah, I don't know the whole story.
Yeah, I think they were, but that doesn't take away from the inherent evil of using human beings for that kind of experimentation.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't think anything of real value came out of that either.
No.
Certainly no moral value. you cannot treat people.
Yeah, so people realize that, and now we do have control boards in place in the United States to prevent these to review a scientific experiment if it involves humans, and to try to avoid these types of these evil excesses.
Yes. We have another question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
I'm from Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada.
Good to have you here. And the language is so close to ours. Yes. Great to have you.
I was wondering, as a man of faith and a man of science, have you ever faced any professional prejudice because of being both? Like, have you ever been passed over for advancement, or has your work ever been seen as less valid because of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and there are other believers who are scientists out there. Many of us just kind of keep it quiet, as I said before. In these large laboratories that I've worked in, been fortunate to work in throughout my career, you can't pick out who the Catholics are, except on Ash Wednesday. And then you see them in the cafeteria after they've gone to Mass, and so you say, okay, there are a few other Catholics around here who are practicing their faith and also doing their science. And so you get to know each other and chat, but the majority of my colleagues and friends are not. And but you learn to love each other as people and have a respect for each other as individuals, and can have the kind of open discussion about the kind of stuff we're talking about with a non-believer over beer or coffee, and that's a good thing. That's a good kind of interaction. And so I've had that kind of friendship throughout my career. I'd never have hid my faith or who I am. And so I think I've enjoyed the fellowship of my colleagues for the most part. There are, however, some people who really are struggling with their own atheism, I think, is what it comes down to, and who really do resent the fact that that people like me are in science. And I think actually when I came to Catholic University of America, it uncovered some of that ugliness that's out there, and I did receive some real negative pressure, professionally because of that. But I got through it with the Lord's help, and it amounted to nothing.
Yeah. I think that sometimes it's intimidation by bullies. And with bullies, generally, if you walk towards them, they back off. Mm-hmm. We have to be respectful and loving, but not back down, in front of bullyism. And that's a lot of what goes on. We have another caller. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Father.
Hi, where are you calling from?
Escanaba, Michigan.
Wonderful. And what's your question or comment?
Okay, wasn't it Einstein that said that science is merely unlocking the mysteries of God? And so all science is really is discovering God. And also, Sir Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of the DNA molecule, was an atheist. But he said that the DNA molecule could never have come into existence by chance, that there had to be an intellect.
So even Sir Crick had to come to a certain point of believing in an intellect greater than we are to come up with DNA. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I'm sure Crick knew, but a lot of our viewers don't know. The study of genetics was also invented by an Augustinian priest. In Austria.
Dutch, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, so would you see it in some ways, like Einstein, that science and physics is just a way of discovering God?
I guess I would put it a little bit differently.
Okay.
I would say that it's uncovering the beauty of God's creation.
Yeah.
And I think that the difference between so I was at the eclipse in Lincoln, Nebraska, a couple days ago.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And I saw for the first time in my life, a full total solar eclipse happen. And, you know, I've been teaching descriptive astronomy to undergraduates for, I can't even count how many times I've taught this class where I describe how an eclipse works and what it's all about. And I've seen the pictures, I've seen videos, I've seen, you know, I thought I knew what an eclipse was. But when I was there and saw this event happen, the sun being replaced by a different object in the sky that you could look at with your naked eye and feel the temperature of the earth change and hear the sound of the animals quiet. It was profoundly, emotional. And so I think to man, nature can do that. And the ancients believed that God was the earth, was the fire, was the sky. These were gods. That God was in nature. And as Christians, as the Judeo Christian discovery that God is actually outside, but created these beautiful wonders, I think is the magic that unlocked this possibility for us to become scientists, in fact.
Exactly. I've for my field in Old Testament, I've had to read lots and lots of ancient Near Eastern mythology. And you're right, they would have the storm was oftentimes the most important god, because the storm god brought rain and conquered his brother, the sea, by taking his water out and bringing it as fresh water to save the world. And the earth was the great mother who had been cut in half by her grandson. And the earth, and it goes on and on. And you see how all of their stories are about sex and violence. And in the Bible, you see it's by the word that God creates, and therefore a demythologized nature.
Exactly.
Because if a Babylonian studies Mother Earth, well, at least she's dead, but what about the storms? I mean, Marduk might kill you with one of his lightning bolts, and Baal could do that to you, and so on. And in the Bible, the word that creates is also word God gives us to be able to understand. And that's what you do. You put into words and symbols and numbers the physical world.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful thing.
Let's take another phone call. We have Robert on the line. Hello, Robert. Where are you calling from? Robert? Do we have him still there? Oh, we lost him. Okay. We can go back to that point, though. I think other people have pointed out that no culture was able to have such a scientific sense as Judeo-Christian culture. And that's why we invented the universities.
Right.
It was part of our faith.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the sort of document that we are using to describe our university, found a university, is an encyclical by St. John Paul II called Ex Corde Ecclesiae, which is Latin for "out of the heart of the church came the university."
Yes.
And so we're using that roadmap for how to be a good university.
And I don't want people to think that the 12th and 13th century were the first time the church started being intellectual, because in the so-called Dark Ages, it was the church that preserved all the science of the ancient Greeks. It was the monks who copied it down, especially Syriac monks, and monks in the West copied. And histories, all the literature. We would not have any Roman or Greek literature if it weren't for the monks. When they talk about the great Arabic cultures, it was flourishing better than Europe. only because the Syriac monks had translated the Greeks into Arabic for them. The Arabs couldn't do it. The Syriac monks did. And that's something that the church kept up what they could of earlier science and then promoted it.
Right, because it was important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the monastery schools and cathedral schools became the basis for the universities that came later on. That's a very important element. Where do you see, oh wait, we got one more caller on the line before we go into another question. John?
Yes, Father Mitch.
Hey, John, what's your question today?
My question is, I believe from my own faith, and I always have. I came back to the Lord in 1978, and I heard about the Shroud of Turin right away. And my faith and some other beautiful spiritual people I've run into, I think that's the burial cloth of Jesus. And I would love for our guests to maybe tell us, what the university or Catholic Church or even himself think about the Shroud of Turin. And I'll hang up.
Thanks, John. As a matter of fact, it was a physicist, Dr. Jackson, who headed up the study of it.
Okay, I don't know a whole lot about it. I saw a talk a few weeks ago by Father Spitzer, who seems to be like the world expert on the Shroud of Turin, and he presented a long list of scientific findings that really do place this burial cloth at the time of Jesus' death, at the location of Jesus' death, and the image that's been imprinted on it there's really no good scientific explanation for how it could have been produced. It wasn't painted on there. It really seems to have come from a burst of light that made a three-dimensional image of this man's body. There's evidence that the iconography of Christ changed after the discovery of the Shroud of Turin. People depicted his face in different ways until this, and then it locked in as like this is the face of Christ. So I don't think there's a church teaching one way or another. It seems to be, however, an extremely intriguing artifact that I don't know, but it certainly Father Spitzer seems to think it's important enough to devote a lot of his time to it, and he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. I mean, he's up here, and I'm like a little ant down there.
And a lot of I'm not sure of all his sources, but I'll bet one of them is Dr. Jackson over in Colorado Springs, who was the physicist that headed the team of about 27 or so scientists, and they looked at the pollen.
Right, the pollen, the fibers.
And even there's limestone dust embedded in it, and there's a chemical in limestone that is an identifier type of chemical. So, and the limestone dust has the same identity as the limestone bed at the tomb of Christ. Christ's tomb is in limestone. And it was cut into, the tomb was cut into an old limestone quarry. And the identifying chemical in every specimen of limestone has limestone dust from inside the tomb of Christ. So at the very minimum, you have to say it was inside the tomb. And it was in the Holy Land, and has all this evidence for it.
And I think some scientists recently studied the blood that's on the shroud itself. What looks like red pigment is actually human blood of like type AB positive, and has chemical markers that come from a torture victim. And so that points to this is really human blood that came from somebody who was tortured to death
and beat on the cheek.
Blunt trauma, massive trauma.
And as one of the professor whom I replaced, it was a Jesuit priest teaching scripture, and I replaced him at the university. He had also helped with the discovery that on there is the imprint of a Pontius Pilate, 2 Pontius Pilate coins.
That's right,
Over the eyes. So that the dead man, they put coins on the eyeballs, and so that was there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's good science with it. And it's great that you're trying to do good science and getting good science integrated with good faith. Keep up your good work. We hope that people respond well to supporting the university with their dollars and with their sons and daughters. Thank you for being with us, and may Almighty God bless all of you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
And it's good for us to remind you, especially in these, even as we get toward the end of summer, this network is brought to you by you. Some of you are still going on vacation and such, and we really ask that you not keep us out. We need to have you in between the gas bill and electric bill, because our bill collectors are not on vacation at all. So we need your support. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you, Father.